The highway lay in darkness, stretching endlessly through the dense forest, its asphalt slick with recent rain. Headlights cut weakly through the fog, illuminating only the nearest curve before vanishing into blackness. Travelers whispered of strange shadows flitting between the trees, of the sudden feeling of being watched even when alone. Drivers reported glimpses of abandoned cars, doors ajar, and the faint echo of footsteps that seemed to vanish before they could be traced. For decades, people had entered this stretch of road and simply never returned. Tonight, the air feels heavier, charged with the unspoken fear of the unknown. Something waits in the mist, not random, not chaotic, but deliberate, patient, and unseen. Every turn, every flicker of light could be the moment a life is quietly claimed. And as you follow this road with us tonight, remember ordinary choices here can become deadly. This is not just a highway. This is a place where shadows take lives, and no one knows exactly why. The road looks harmless in daylight. Long straight stretches of asphalt cut through endless land where nothing seems hidden and nothing feels dangerous. But when night falls and the sky turns black without warning, this place changes. Headlights disappear faster than they should. Sounds travel strangely, and people who stop here are sometimes never seen again. For decades, drivers have reported the same feeling the moment they enter this stretch, a sense of being watched, a sudden pressure to keep moving. Those who ignored that instinct became part of the mystery. What happened on this road was not loud or violent. It was quiet, and that silence is what made it deadly. Tonight, we return to a location that refuses to give answers, a place where the land itself feels like it remembers what it has taken. During the day, the highway runs through open country in the western United States, far from cities and far from help. It is used mostly by long-haul truckers, late-night travelers, and locals who know the shortcuts. There are no businesses for miles, no gas stations, no houses close enough to notice headlights passing, just dry land, low hills, and wind moving through tall grass. Locals call it a dead zone because cell signals vanish without warning. Maps show nothing unusual, but stories say otherwise. Over the years, this place has collected disappearances, accidents, and unsolved deaths that share no clear explanation. The cases are spread across decades, yet all of them circle back to the same few miles of road. One of those cases began with a man named Daniel Harper. He was 38 years old, worked as a regional sales manager, and lived a structured, predictable life. He was married, no children, no criminal history, no known enemies. He traveled often and was known for being careful, almost cautious. On the evening he vanished, Daniel was driving alone, returning from a work trip. He had taken this route before, save time. He told his wife he would be home before midnight. His last phone call was calm, no fear, no urgency, just a routine update before the signal dropped. Daniel never arrived home. When his car was found the next morning, it was parked on the shoulder of the highway. The doors were unlocked. The keys were missing. His wallet, phone, and luggage were still inside. There were no signs of a struggle. No skid marks, no blood. The engine was cold. It looked like he had simply pulled over and stepped out. That detail would become the center of every theory that followed. Why would a cautious man stop here, in the middle of nowhere? At night, police treated it as a possible breakdown at first, but the car showed no mechanical issues. The fuel tank was half full. The tires were intact. Investigators searched the surrounding land on foot and by helicopter. They found nothing. No footprints that made sense. No discarded items. No direction of travel. It was as if Daniel had stepped off the road and vanished into the dark without leaving a trace. As the days passed, the location itself began to draw attention. Officers working the case learned that this was not the first time something like this had happened here. A truck driver had disappeared 10 years earlier under nearly identical circumstances. His rig was found abandoned, lights on, engine off, cargo untouched. He was never found. A young couple once reported seeing a man standing alone on the roadside in the middle of the night, waving for help. When they turned around minutes later, he was gone. No nearby roads, no vehicles, just empty land. Daniel's wife struggled to understand how a place could take a person. She described him as someone who avoided risk, who never stopped for strangers, who followed rules. The idea that he would pull over willingly made no sense to her. Investigators questioned whether he might have seen something in the road, an accident, an animal, or someone in distress. But no evidence supported any of it. There were no reports, no emergency calls, no witnesses who saw him stop. As the investigation continued, a pattern began to form quietly in the background. Every unexplained case linked to this highway happened between 10 at night and 2 in the morning. Every vehicle was found intact. Every person vanished alone, and in every case, there was a brief loss of signal before contact ended. Technicians confirmed that the area caused unusual interference. Radios failed, phones dropped, GPS systems froze or reset. No official explanation was ever provided. Years passed and the case grew cold. The road remained open. Traffic continued to pass through without incident. But locals avoided stopping. Truckers shared warnings and hushed conversations. If something feels wrong, keep driving. If you see something strange, do not stop. Those rules were not written anywhere. They were learned through fear and memory. Daniel Harper was declared legally dead 7 years after his disappearance. No remains were ever recovered. No suspects identified. No cause determined. His case joined a small list quietly stored in county records, all tied to the same location. Officials denied any connection. Statistically, they said it meant nothing. But maps do not lie, and patterns do not appear by accident. Today the highway still looks ordinary. Sunlight hides what darkness reveals. Cars pass through, unaware of the stories beneath their tires. But at night, the land feels different. Wind moves without rhythm. Headlights feel too small against the open dark. And somewhere in that stretch of road, something waits, not loudly, not violently, but patiently. The mystery of this place does not end with Daniel Harper. In fact, his disappearance was only the beginning of what investigators would uncover years later when the case was reopened and the road finally began to give up its secrets. And when that happened, the truth would be far more unsettling than anyone expected. Each report was fragmented, minor, seemingly insignificant. Yet collectively they painted an eerie pattern of isolation and sudden absence. Forensic teams combed over every inch of the vehicle, checking for fingerprints, DNA, and even microscopic traces that might hint at Daniel's last movements. They found none that explained why he had exited the car or where he had gone. Tire pressure, brake condition, and engine performance all suggested the vehicle was functioning perfectly. It was as though Daniel had simply chosen to leave, willingly and calmly, despite the risk and isolation. This incongruity puzzled everyone, feeding the growing narrative that the location itself had a strange influence over the events. Local authorities turned to historical records, comparing past reports of disappearances along the same highway. They discovered a series of unexplained cases stretching back decades, each with remarkably similar circumstances. The timing was always between late night and early morning, the majority occurring during periods of low visibility or intermittent cell signal. Analysts noted that the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Even years apart, the locations of the disappearances formed a corridor along the highway, one that could be mapped and studied. As the initial investigation unfolded, search teams expanded their operations into the surrounding forests. Days passed, with no evidence, no signs, and no answers. For the families, the wait was agonizing. Each passing day eroded hope and strengthened the reality that Daniel's disappearance might remain unsolved for years. Fatigue, limited visibility, and subtle auditory or visual cues could make someone act contrary to their normal cautious behavior. When combined with the unique characteristics of this highway, its isolation, intermittent signals, and eerily quiet surroundings, the conditions could have created a psychological pressure that prompted Daniel to step off the road, unknowingly walking into danger. None of these habits aligned with the decision to pull over on that highway shoulder. The gap between expectation and reality created a haunting tension, emphasizing how little was understood about that night. It was not simply that Daniel was missing, it was that the circumstances defied logic, turning his disappearance into a puzzle that confounded even the most experienced investigators. Cell tower logs were analyzed. Although the area's inconsistent signal proved frustrating, traffic cameras provided minimal insight, often cutting off as vehicles passed through dead zones. Despite the effort, the digital trail was weak, fragmented, and ultimately inconclusive. Yet even these limitations contributed to the psychological profile of the location itself. The highway seemed designed to obscure, to disrupt, to render ordinary investigative methods ineffective. The land was not just a backdrop, it became an active element in the unfolding mystery. For investigators and family members alike, the unsettling reality was clear. This location had claimed yet another life, quietly and without explanation. Investigators cataloged each story, searching for correlations that might reveal a clue hidden in plain sight. The corridor revealed something more when plotted geographically. Each disappearance fell within a narrow band of the highway, where cell signals dipped unexpectedly and road lighting was minimal. Minor exits and side paths lined the stretch, often overgrown, rarely maintained, providing concealment. Analysts noted that the victims' vehicles were typically found near these hidden spots, reinforcing the idea that the road's geography itself played a critical role in the events. The pattern was not random. It was precise enough to suggest that someone or something was exploiting it deliberately. Theories began to emerge. Some investigators considered natural explanations, wildlife, treacherous terrain, or accidents that left no evidence. Others explored psychological angles, positing that the victims had been influenced by fatigue, low visibility, or even the uncanny isolation of the highway, causing disorientation and irrational decisions. Each theory had merits, yet none could explain the consistency of the disappearances over decades. The corridor's repetition suggested human intervention, but no suspect had yet been identified. No witness had reported a suspect directly, and no evidence tied the cases together definitively. It was a mystery that defied conventional logic. Technological review became a critical component. Traffic cameras, though sparse, were examined frame by frame. Occasional glimpses of figures near the road provided tantalizing hints but no confirmation. Analysis of mobile phone records revealed patterns of signal dropouts, brief flashes of connectivity that occurred near the locations of the disappearances. This suggested that either the environment or an unknown method had interfered with digital tracking, further complicating the investigation. Every piece of data pointed to an invisible force shaping events. Making the highway more than just a road, it was a trap in which ordinary methods of observation and investigation could fail. Community input added depth to the investigation. Local residents recalled stories passed down from truckers and travelers, tales of sudden chills, unexplained lights, or figures that vanished as quickly as they appeared. These anecdotes, though often dismissed as folklore, reinforced the corridor's reputation as a place of unease and danger. Investigators cross-referenced these stories with case details, noting correlations between reported oddities and actual disappearance sites. While anecdotal, this information painted a psychological portrait of the location, suggesting that fear and uncertainty were as tangible as any physical clue. Early theories about human involvement began to coalesce. Some believed that a perpetrator exploited the corridor's isolation, using knowledge of terrain, timing, and human behavior to manipulate victims into stopping or leaving their vehicles. The consistency of abandoned cars and missing persons indicated methodical planning. But no suspects, no witnesses, and no direct evidence existed. The highway itself seemed to shield the perpetrator, the land's geometry and sparse observation points providing cover that no ordinary criminal could have expected. Every investigative lead returned to the road, to its shadows, to its quiet concealment. Amid the research, investigators noticed subtle hidden patterns in the victims' behaviors. Daniel Harper and others had all shown signs of routine vigilance in their daily lives, yet each was drawn off the road in the same way. In hindsight, the combination of fatigue, low light, and a carefully manipulated moment created conditions where their normal caution became insufficient. The highway exploited ordinary habits, turning familiar patterns into vulnerabilities. Psychological profiling began to emerge, not of the victims, but of the unseen orchestrator who understood these habits and used them to their advantage. This idea unsettled investigators more than any evidence they were dealing with someone who had studied human behavior in extraordinary detail. By the end of this phase, the corridor's reputation had solidified. Analysts compiled a comprehensive chart linking each disappearance, noting every geographic feature, signal anomaly, and witness account. What had once appeared random now suggested deliberate design. Yet even with these insights, the mystery remained elusive. No one had been identified, no direct confrontation had occurred, and no one had explained why this stretch of road held such power over ordinary travelers. Every conclusion led to another question. Every observation deepened the psychological tension. The highway remained silent, holding its secrets just out of reach, daring investigators and families alike to uncover what it protected. And so, as the corridor's pattern became undeniable, the road began to tell a story of patient design and meticulous timing. It whispered warnings to those who traveled it, leaving only fragments for the investigators to piece together. The invisible forces that manipulated the highway, combined with the behavior of ordinary people, created a mystery that would challenge every assumption and continue to haunt anyone who came too close. Hidden in plain sight, the truth waited in the shadows, ready to reveal itself, but only to those willing to understand the subtlety of its patterns. The case had gone cold for nearly a decade, but the corridor of disappearances refused to be forgotten. When a new team of investigators reopened the files, they were struck immediately by the meticulous pattern that had gone unnoticed before. Maps were redrawn. Every mile marker, every overgrown side path, every abandoned vehicle location was re-examined. Forensic technology had advanced, and with it came new possibilities. Thermal imaging, satellite analysis, and digital mapping tools revealed subtle clues, slight depressions in the roadside soil, patterns of foliage, disturbance, and faint tire tracks that had faded years ago. The landscape itself seemed to yield its secrets, though only to the patient eye. One of the most shocking discoveries came from revisiting Daniel Harper's abandoned car. High-resolution scans revealed microfibers and a small smear of an unidentified substance on the driver's side door. Though minute, these traces suggested that Daniel had not left entirely on his own. There had been contact, subtle and careful, designed to leave almost no evidence. When compared with similar findings in older cases along the same corridor, a pattern of precise interference emerged. Someone had manipulated each scene with extraordinary foresight. leaving each disappearance seemingly accidental while controlling the variables that could expose them. Witnesses were re-interviewed, some decades older, some reluctant to revisit the events. Their memories added context to what technology suggested. A truck driver remembered seeing a faint glint on the side of the road, a reflective shape that appeared to move just out of reach of his headlights. Another local resident recalled a momentary flash of red and blue in the distance. Not from official vehicles, but an unidentifiable light that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Combining these accounts with the physical evidence, investigators began to construct a timeline that suggested deliberate orchestration. The corridor itself was a stage. Every mile measured, every light, sound, and shadow potentially a part of a larger plan. The psychological impact of reopening the case was profound. Families who had long ago accepted loss found themselves grappling with renewed questions. Daniel Harper's wife described a mixture of fear and hope as she revisited memories she had long suppressed. For the investigators, the frustration of the unsolved past merged with the excitement of new possibilities. The corridor was no longer just a place of mystery. It had become a canvas upon which human cunning had been applied with astonishing precision. Each clue, each minor anomaly, suggested the presence of someone intimately familiar with human behavior and the vulnerabilities of isolated environments. The investigative team began to focus on timing. All disappearances occurred within a narrow late-night window, usually between 10 and 2, when drivers were tired and alertness waned. The correlation was striking. Combined with evidence of slight environmental manipulations, glimmers of light, minor obstructions, and false paths, it became increasingly likely that someone had used this knowledge to guide their victims. This revelation transformed the case from a series of unfortunate accidents into a study of premeditated psychological manipulation. The highway was not merely a passive backdrop, it had been engineered as part of a methodical plan to isolate and control. A breakthrough came when satellite imagery from older dates was cross-referenced with current maps. Slight alterations in vegetation, previously invisible to the naked eye, indicated areas where vehicles may have been diverted or stopped deliberately. Footpaths leading into dense forest patches matched with witness accounts of fleeting glimpses of movement. These discoveries suggested that the orchestrator had exploited natural concealments to create the illusion of disappearance without direct confrontation. The highway was a tool, and the patterns revealed a deep understanding of both terrain and human behavior. As the case reopened, investigators noted the emotional toll on the families. Reliving the details of each disappearance required confronting grief, fear, and uncertainty all over again. Daniel's wife found herself walking portions of the highway, retracing the steps that may have led him into the unknown. The investigators encouraged caution, yet even they could not shake the psychological weight of the corridor. Each turn of the road, each stretch of isolated land, seemed imbued with the presence of those who had vanished. The highway itself became a character in the story, silent yet ever present, shaping both the events and the emotions of those who sought the truth. Despite the progress, the corridor continued to resist full understanding. No definitive suspect had emerged. No one could explain why the orchestrator targeted this location, nor why their methods left minimal evidence. Yet the shocking discoveries, microfibers, traces of interaction, subtle environmental manipulations changed the perception of the highway from a simple stretch of road into a calculated trap. The more investigators learned, the more chilling the implications became. Every mile of asphalt, every shadow cast by the trees, every glimmer of light now carried significance. It was a silent warning that something had planned, patient, and meticulous had operated here for decades. By the time the investigation reached its midpoint, the sense of escalation was undeniable. The corridor had taken lives, challenged technology, and confounded law enforcement for years. And now the renewed scrutiny was revealing not just patterns, but intent. The road that once appeared ordinary was now recognized as a site of deliberate psychological orchestration. Each discovery raised new questions. How many had observed without interference? How had no one been caught in the act? What unseen presence had moved with such careful precision? The answers remained elusive, but the reopening had transformed the case, turning decades of silence into a tense anticipation of what might finally be uncovered. And yet, as night fell over the corridor once more, the land remained quiet. The trees swaying gently, the asphalt stretching endlessly into darkness. The highway had revealed enough to terrify, but not enough to satisfy. Investigators knew that the next breakthrough could come at any moment. But the shadows of the past still lingered, patient and unyielding. The corridor had begun to tell its story, slowly, deliberately, And with a chilling clarity, this was a place where ordinary choices became extraordinary traps, and where the invisible hand of calculation shaped every disappearance in a way that was only now beginning to be understood. The reopening of the corridor brought a wave of psychological intensity that investigators and families alike could not have anticipated. For those who had long accepted the loss of loved ones, the renewed attention to the highway dredged up memories both vivid and haunting. Daniel Harper's wife described a recurring sense of presence, as though he were still near, yet unreachable. Sleep was interrupted by imagined headlights cutting through darkness and whispers carried on the wind. Investigators reported feeling a persistent unease during nighttime sweeps, as though the land itself was watching, responding to their presence. The psychological weight of the corridor became as important as the physical evidence, shaping every decision and observation. The victims' behaviors, studied retrospectively, revealed subtle but consistent patterns. Each had been cautious, disciplined, and aware of their surroundings, yet the highway, with its peculiar combination of isolation, shadows, and signal disruptions, exploited small vulnerabilities. Fatigue, distraction, or a fleeting instinct to stop could be enough to shift ordinary caution into dangerous compliance. Forensic psychologists suggested that the orchestrator, whoever they were, had an intuitive understanding of human behavior under stress. Families were caught in cycles of hope and despair, each new lead opening the possibility of closure while simultaneously reinforcing uncertainty. Search patterns that worked in other regions failed here, reinforcing the notion that the corridor was not simply a neutral space. Every disappearance seemed designed to exploit environmental features: low lighting, isolated paths, subtle noises, and reflective surfaces that drew attention away from the actual risk. The highway became a psychological labyrinth, testing perception, patience, and instinct in ways investigators were only beginning to quantify. The escalation of these findings forced a re-evaluation of prior assumptions. Initially, the corridor had been treated as a string of unfortunate coincidences. Now, the evidence suggested deliberate orchestration on a level that exceeded ordinary criminal planning. The meticulous attention to timing, location, and victim psychology pointed to someone or some method aware of human patterns and environmental weaknesses. Each anomaly, from microfibers in abandoned vehicles to faint disturbances in roadside foliage, was now interpreted as part of a coherent system, a calculated manipulation of chance and circumstance that demanded respect for its ingenuity as well as fear for its consequences. Families, investigators, and community members experienced the consequences in real time. Locals who once drove the corridor routinely now avoided it entirely. Long-haul truckers shared warnings about the stretch in hushed tones. Emotional trauma, long dormant, resurfaced, coloring interpretations of minor incidents and every unexpected sound or shadow along the highway. For some, the experience induced a hyper-awareness that bordered on obsession. Observers became participants in the psychological weight of the corridor, demonstrating how the environment itself could extend influence beyond physical interactions. Fear had become a tangible factor in the unfolding investigation. Additional technological analysis revealed subtle but critical insights. Thermal scans, satellite imagery, and time-stamped records allowed investigators to reconstruct probable victim paths and estimate the orchestrator's interventions. Evidence suggested intentional placement of objects, minor alterations to natural features, and exploitation of environmental conditions to direct behavior without direct contact. These revelations elevated the case from a series of unexplained vanishings to a study in controlled manipulation, psychological pressure, and environmental exploitation. The corridor was not a passive backdrop. It had become an instrument of precision. As the psychological depth of the investigation unfolded, the consequences for the victims' families became increasingly apparent. Emotional scars deepened as the true nature of the corridor emerged. Survivors and relatives confronted the realization that ordinary habits, stopping for a car, checking the surroundings, following instinct, had been transformed into risks by deliberate manipulation. The corridor's influence extended far beyond its physical presence, shaping memory, behavior, and emotional response. Each new discovery, while illuminating, also underscored the danger and subtlety of the environment itself. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the corridor represented both a physical and psychological escalation. The highway had claimed lives silently over decades, exploiting ordinary behaviors and human psychology with precision. Investigators were now confronted with the dual challenge of analyzing physical evidence while understanding the unseen pressures shaping behavior. Every clue, every observation, every detail was steeped in the shadow of the corridor's influence, leaving a sense of anticipation and dread. The story had grown deeper, darker, and far more psychologically complex than anyone had imagined. Years of investigation, technological analysis, and psychological profiling finally converged to reveal a truth that had eluded authorities for decades. The corridor, once considered merely a dangerous stretch of highway, was now understood as a site of deliberate orchestration by an individual with exceptional knowledge of human behavior and the terrain. Microfibers, subtle disturbances in roadside foliage, and traces of interaction at abandoned vehicles all pointed to a single pattern. The disappearances were not random accidents. Someone had studied the victims, the timing, and the environment, exploiting fatigue, isolation, and perception to create moments where ordinary caution became insufficient. The orchestrator's methods were chilling in their simplicity. Minor alterations in natural features, reflective objects placed strategically, and subtle manipulation of light and sound guided victims' attention away from safe paths. The corridor became a psychological trap, turning predictable human behavior into a tool for control. Investigators concluded that Daniel Harper and others had not simply vanished by chance. They had been led into situations that isolated them and rendered them vulnerable, without any direct confrontation. The meticulous orchestration suggested a mind both calculating and patient. Someone who could predict responses to minor environmental cues with unnerving accuracy. Forensic breakthroughs confirmed the theory. Advances in soil analysis, trace detection, and digital reconstruction allowed the team to establish probable movements for each victim in relation to the orchestrator's interventions. In some cases, minute traces indicated where someone had touched surfaces or guided attention. Satellite imagery and historical photographs revealed subtle changes in vegetation and road features coinciding with disappearances, suggesting deliberate preparation. Every clue, from reflective scraps to slight indentations in roadside soil, contributed to a portrait of calculated human manipulation rather than random misfortune. Witness accounts, revisited with new context, fit into this emerging picture. Drivers who reported fleeting shadows or unexplained flashes of light were no longer anomalies. They were components of a deliberate environmental influence designed to misdirect, distract, or intimidate. The highway had been engineered not through technology alone, but by careful attention to human perception and the vulnerabilities inherent in isolation and fatigue. Each disappearance was a lesson in the orchestrator's understanding of psychological pressure, demonstrating that even the most cautious and disciplined individuals could be manipulated under the right circumstances. The investigation also revealed a psychological signature in the orchestrator's selection of victims. All were traveling alone, engaged in predictable routines, and operating within limited time windows during the night. These commonalities, once overlooked, suggested careful planning and observation. The orchestrator's focus on predictable behaviors allowed for minimal exposure and maximum control, creating a method that left no immediate trace and confounded traditional investigative techniques. The corridor itself amplified these tactics, providing isolation, limited observation, and subtle environmental cues that enhanced the effectiveness of the manipulation's authorities. While unable to identify a specific perpetrator, recognized the operational brilliance behind the corridor's use. It was both a physical and psychological instrument, one that had been applied consistently over decades. The highway had become more than a backdrop. It was a carefully controlled environment designed to exploit human perception and behavior. This realization reframed the disappearances, They were not merely tragic accidents, but the product of deliberate, sustained manipulation. Investigators began to view the corridor as a case study in environmental psychology applied to criminal activity, a rare example of human behavior exploited with precision over time. The revelation also had profound emotional implications. Families who had long awaited closure now understood that their loved ones had been caught in a deliberate and sophisticated trap. The knowledge brought relief in the sense that the events were not random or meaningless, but it also intensified grief by clarifying the calculated nature of their loss. Daniel Harper's wife, confronted with this understanding, described a mixture of anger, sorrow, and a need for justice that would never fully be satisfied. The psychological dimension of the corridor extended beyond the missing it shaped the lives and perceptions of all who interacted with its legacy. Finally, investigators synthesized the corridor's patterns into a comprehensive profile, emphasizing both environmental and behavioral elements. Timing, geography, perceptual manipulation, and psychological influence combined to create a framework for understanding the disappearances. While the orchestrator remained unidentified, the structure of their method became clear: exploit isolation, guide attention, manipulate perception, and minimize evidence. The corridor was the medium. The victims were selected by routine, and the results were almost impossibly effective. It was a revelation that transformed decades of unsolved cases into a coherent, terrifying narrative of human calculation and environmental mastery. By the end of the investigation, the corridor had revealed its truth. These were not accidents. These were orchestrated disappearances, carefully designed to exploit human vulnerability and environmental control. The knowledge, while chilling, allowed authorities to prevent future incidents along the highway by implementing monitoring, better lighting, and communication improvements. But the psychological imprint remained the awareness that ordinary behavior, when combined with deliberate environmental manipulation, could render anyone vulnerable. The corridor had finally told its story, exposing a pattern of methodical planning that few had ever anticipated. A revelation both horrifying and illuminating in equal measure. The night has a way of holding on to secrets, of keeping them just out of reach until someone is willing to confront the shadows. For the families of the corridors vanished. The years of uncertainty had been a slow, silent torment, each passing day a reminder of what had been lost. But the reopening of the investigation, the revelations of calculated manipulation, and the painstaking reconstruction of events offered a new perspective. It did not bring Daniel Harper back. It did not erase the absence. Yet it illuminated a truth that had long eluded everyone. The highway was not a neutral passage, but a deliberate stage, a place where ordinary routines became dangerous and where the invisible hand of calculation shaped destinies. The aftermath was a mixture of grief, understanding, and cautious vigilance. Families who had once endured silent loss now confronted the deliberate nature of the events, reconciling years of unanswered questions with the harsh reality that their loved ones had been victims of extraordinary planning. Daniel's wife described walking the corridor once more, feeling the isolation, sensing the potential for manipulation that had claimed so many lives. The experience was haunting, yet grounding. A painful reminder that the world could be shaped by forces both seen and unseen, by intentions hidden beneath the calm of ordinary landscapes. For her, understanding was both a balm and a burden. Authorities implemented changes to prevent further tragedies. Improved lighting, enhanced monitoring, and increased public awareness transformed the once isolated corridor into a place of vigilance. Signs warned travelers of the area's history. Patrols were increased, and technology was applied to detect unusual behavior along the stretch. Yet even as practical measures reduced risk, the psychological imprint of the highway remained. Anyone who drove it at night carried a subconscious awareness of its history, a silent respect for the invisible forces that had once dominated it. The corridor's legacy extended beyond the disappeared. It shaped behavior, perception, and memory for all who encountered it. The moral lesson became clear. Human behavior, environment, and subtle manipulation can intersect in ways that ordinary assumptions fail to anticipate. The corridor had exploited predictable habits, minor lapses in attention, and environmental cues, demonstrating the power of deliberate orchestration over isolated individuals. Investigators recognized that understanding human psychology in conjunction with geography was critical, and that even the most mundane actions could carry unforeseen consequences. The story of the corridor was both cautionary and illuminating, a testament to the delicate interplay of choice, context, and unseen forces. Emotionally, the story resonated with viewers, families, and investigators alike. The disappearances had left wounds that could never fully heal, yet the revelation of the orchestrated patterns brought a measure of closure. Understanding that the victims had not simply vanished by chance allowed for reflection, analysis, and a clearer grasp of what had transpired. The corridor had taken lives, yes, but it had also revealed the power of observation, patience, and the human mind. In studying it, investigators and viewers alike confronted the uncomfortable truth that the ordinary world can conceal extraordinary dangers. The chilling final thought lingered long after the road was cleared, the lights installed, and patrols increased. The highway remained open, seemingly ordinary, yet it retained its history in the subtle curves of asphalt, the swaying of the trees, and the silence that stretched into the night. The land remembered the disappearances, the careful manipulations, and the invisible hand that orchestrated events with terrifying precision. It was a place where ordinary travelers could unknowingly step into the extraordinary, where vigilance was never enough, and where the quiet of night carried a weight that few fully appreciated. As viewers consider the corridor today, the story ends not with violence but with reflection. It ends with the understanding that some mysteries are shaped not by chaos, but by deliberate intent, that absence can be orchestrated, and that even familiar environments can become traps under precise conditions. Daniel Harper and the others who vanished remain part of the highway's silent testimony. Their stories, now understood in context, warn against complacency and remind us of the delicate balance between routine and risk, perception and reality, the known and the unseen. The corridor continues to exist, a quiet monument to human vulnerability and environmental cunning, a chilling reminder that some roads carry more than miles, they carry secrets.